When people ask me where I'm from, I usually say Minnesota. It's easier than explaining that for 10 years, my world was the size of a basement. But this isn't a story about cruelty. It's about silence and what happens when you finally learn to speak again. The house where it happened still stands on Willow Creek Road. Every time I drive by it now, I'm struck by how ordinary it looks. White siding, blue shutters, a maple tree in the yard that turns gold every fall. No one would guess what it held. Not even the neighbors who waved to my parents every Sunday morning. For years, they called me the quiet one. I suppose I was. When silence is all you have, it becomes a kind of language. I was 14 when it started. My parents said I was difficult, too curious, too emotional, too much like the mother my father couldn't forgive. They said the basement was temporary, a way to teach me discipline, to make me better. I believed them, because children believe anything if it's spoken softly enough. Time is strange when you have no calendar. The light that slipped through the small basement window was my only clock. Morning was gold, afternoon was white, and evening was the color of water. I counted seasons by sound: snowplows in winter, lawnmowers in spring, cicadas in summer. Every noise above became a reminder that life was still happening, just without me. Years later, when people ask me how I survived, I tell them the truth. I started talking to the air. At first it was whispers, prayers, apologies, stories I made up to keep my mind alive. Then one day, I began to sing. Quietly at first, then louder, until even the basement walls seemed to listen. That was the first time I realized my voice still worked. And once you remember that, no one can keep you quiet again. It wasn't the police who found me. It was a mail carrier, a woman named June, who noticed the same package sitting untouched on the porch for 3 weeks. She knocked. No one answered, so she called the sheriff. When they found me, I was 19, half starved, half alive, but still me, still breathing, still singing. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt invisible for so long that being seen almost hurt? That was 12 years ago. I live in a quiet neighborhood now, a little blue house near Lake Superior, where the air smells like pine and salt. I keep the windows open, even in winter. The sound of the wind reminds me that walls don't own me anymore. I don't tell many people what happened. When they ask why I'm alone, I just say, because peace takes space. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear echoes of the old basement, the creak of the pipes, the hum of the heater, the soft drip of water. But instead of fear, I feel gratitude, because I can hear them from above now, from the life I built with my own 2 hands. The first year after they found me was harder than the 10 I spent underground. Freedom, it turns out, can be overwhelming when you don't remember how to use it. The doctors called it adjustment trauma. They said I'd been deprived of stimulation. But what they didn't understand was that silence had been my world, and noise, even kindness, felt violent. Every sound startled me. The hum of the refrigerator, the phone ringing, even my own footsteps on tile.
I would sit for hours, just trying to understand how the world could be both beautiful and loud. The hospital kept me for 3 weeks. They ran tests, asked questions, took photographs I never saw. When I was discharged, they said the state would handle the rest. Handle, I learned, was another word for forget. The investigation never made it far. My parents had already disappeared by the time the police came back with warrants. Some said they left for Canada. Others said they didn't make it that far. Either way, I never saw them again. And that was its own kind of mercy. At 19, I was placed in a small rehabilitation home just outside Duluth. It had white walls, a nurse named Clara who smelled like cinnamon, and a garden where the residents were encouraged to reconnect with the world. The first time I touched grass again, I cried. The ground was warm and alive beneath my fingers, soft and forgiving. I stayed there for almost 2 years, learning the simplest things all over again. How to eat at a table with others. How to sleep without fear of footsteps. How to say my name out loud without flinching. One afternoon, Clara brought me a small mirror. "Keep it," she said. "It's yours." I remember staring at my reflection for hours. It felt like meeting a stranger, one who had waited patiently for me to remember her. "Who are you?" I whispered. And for the first time, I said it back to myself. "I'm Emily." It was such a small word, but it tasted like survival. I found work 6 months later, cleaning rooms at a lakeside motel. No one there asked questions. I liked that. The scent of bleach, the steady hum of the vacuum, the view of the water, all of it helped me believe I was finally part of something ordinary. At night, I'd walk by the lake with my shoes in hand. The water shimmered under the street lights, and every ripple felt like a pulse. Life moving again. And this time, I was in it. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to learn how to live again, even after surviving what should have broken you? There were still nights when I woke up panicked, certain the door would slam shut again. But I'd open my eyes, see the moon through my bedroom window, and remind myself, this is yours now. This air, this light, this sky. I started keeping a notebook by my bed. Every night I'd write one line beginning with, "Today I saw." It became my way of collecting proof that I existed. Today I saw a red bird. Today I saw a stranger smile. Today I saw myself in the mirror and didn't look away. By my 25th birthday, I moved into my own apartment. It was small. One window, one plant, one cup, one plate. But every inch of it was freedom. And even though I didn't have a family anymore, I wasn't lonely, because I was finally learning that loneliness isn't the absence of people, it's the absence of self. And I had found her again. By the time I turned 30, most people who met me never guessed what I'd been through. I'd learned to smile, to laugh at the right moments, to make small talk about the weather and grocery prices. I worked at the local library by then, a quiet place, the kind that smells like dust and stories that outlived their writers. It suited me. Books were my first safe people. They didn't ask questions, didn't judge the years I'd missed. They just offered me other lives to borrow until I remembered how to live my own. One afternoon, a little girl came in with her father. She couldn't have been older than 7. She held a book about constellations and asked if I could help her find the one that looks like a W. Cassiopeia. As I bent down to show her, I caught my reflection in the glass of the display case. I didn't look afraid anymore, and I realized something. Somewhere between the past and this ordinary moment, I'd stopped being someone's victim. I'd quietly become someone's teacher. It wasn't until a few months later that I received the letter. It came from the county courthouse, marked confidential. Inside was a single page, typed official. This letter is to inform you that the remains of your parents were discovered in the Boundary Waters region. I read it 3 times before I felt anything. Then, slowly, relief, deep and strange, settled over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't forgiveness. It was the feeling of a door finally closing after standing open too long. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and whispered to the empty room, "You can rest now." I wasn't talking to them. That night, I walked down to Lake Superior. The air was cold and smelled of pine and salt. I stood at the edge, letting the wind whip my hair, and I spoke out loud to the water. "I forgive you," I said, "not because you deserve it, but because I do."
The wind didn't answer, but I swear the lake moved differently after that, gentler, like it understood. After that night, something shifted in me. I started volunteering with a support group for survivors of captivity and trauma. At first, I just made coffee and folded flyers. But one evening, the group leader asked if I'd like to share my story. I hesitated. For years, silence had been my safety. Speaking felt like breaking it open again. But then I thought of the people still trapped, not in basements, but in memories, in fear, in shame, and I realized silence was never meant to be a home. So I told them, not every detail, just the truth that mattered, that the worst things don't erase you, they just demand that you rebuild yourself, piece by piece, until even your scars start to look like stories. Tell me in the comments, have you ever forgiven something not to excuse it, but to finally breathe again? A few months later, the group's organizer asked if I speak at a small conference. It was the first time I'd ever stood behind a microphone. My hands trembled, but when I looked out at the faces, men, women, even a few teenagers, I felt the same peace I felt by the water that night. I began with one sentence. For 10 years, I lived in silence. Now I speak for those still waiting to be heard. And when I said it, I realized that was the first birthday gift I ever given myself. When the session ended, a woman hugged me. She whispered, "I thought I was alone." I smiled through tears. "You never were." That was the moment I knew the basement wasn't my ending. It was my beginning. It's been 20 years since I was found. I'm 39 now. The house that once held me is gone. The city tore it down years ago. In its place stands a playground, bright and loud,
filled with the kind of laughter that heals what buildings once broke. Sometimes I drive by and park across the street. I sit in my car and listen to the sound of children shouting, swinging, running, and I think, this is what freedom sounds like. People often ask me how I can still live in the same state, the same town. I tell them that running away doesn't make the ghosts quieter. Facing them does. Every street here has a piece of my past, but also pieces of my survival. There's the grocery store where I bought my first birthday cake. The bus stop where I watched my first snowfall as a free woman. The library where I learned to belong again. Each of them is proof that you can build a life out of what was meant to bury you. Last summer, I bought a small house near the lake. White shutters, a blue door, flowers along the porch. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. Every corner smells like sunlight and clean sheets. I hung wind chimes by the window, so there's always sound. A soft reminder that silence isn't my prison anymore. On my first night there, I turned off all the lights, sat on the living room floor, and whispered, "I made it." The walls didn't answer. They didn't have to. They were listening. A few months later, I got a letter from June, the mail carrier who found me all those years ago. She said she was retiring and wanted to visit before moving south. When she came by, we sat on the porch, two women bound by something unspoken but sacred. She smiled and said, "You look like peace." I laughed softly. I had to earn it. Before she left, she handed me an old envelope. Inside was a photograph, the day they found me, standing in the sunlight for the first time. I looked younger, fragile, eyes wide and squinting against brightness. June said she kept it all these years because she wanted to remember why she knocked that day. Now it hangs in my hallway, not as a reminder of pain, but of courage. Tell me in the comments, have you ever looked back on your darkest moment and realized it was the beginning of your light? Every year, on the anniversary of my rescue, I walk down to the lake. I sit on the bench facing the water, close my eyes, and just breathe. No words, no fear, just gratitude. Because healing isn't loud. It's not fireworks or speeches or even closure. It's waking up one day and realizing you've stopped counting the years by what hurt you. Sometimes I still dream of that basement, but in the dream, the door is open now. Light pours down the stairs, and I walk up, barefoot, unafraid. And when I reach the top, I step into my own kitchen where sunlight spills across the floor. I pour coffee, open the window, and let the morning air in. It smells like rain and lilacs and everything I thought I'd never feel again. Because the truth is, survival isn't about escaping. It's about becoming. And I became someone new, someone whole, someone who remembers and still chooses to love the world anyway. Because here on True Life Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember them. Subscribe, stay with us, and help the silence end, one true story at a time.